Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Workflows and Espressos. I am Meaghan Myers, and I say this every week that I'm excited to be here, but I'm very excited to be here this week because not only do we have two of the most highly respected women in data in our space on the podcast today, they are also two of my good friends in the industry, and I'm so excited about our conversation. This is our first podcast episode this season with the women interviews that I plan on doing over the next 10 weeks. And I am really excited about the important conversations that we're going to have. And I actually heard yesterday that 60% of the short-term rental space is made up of women, which I thought was so interesting and such a timely conversation for this month because it is still March. Hanging on to Women's History Month, only a couple more days, although by the time this episode comes out, it will be April, but it still counts. So we have Amber Prickett here with us today, who is a solutions consultant at Price Labs. We worked together at 360 Blue for several years, maybe not several years, a couple of years. It feels like several.
Yeah.
Amber, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you. And we also have Melanie Brown from Key Data. She is the VP of Data Analytics and Insights. Melanie, beyond excited to have you here. I just can't wait for all the fun things that you're going to share with us today.
Yay, so happy to be here.
So Amber, let's start with you. Why don't you give us like a quick rundown? How'd you end up in the industry? Well, you switched, which I recently just did too, from the property manager side over to the vendor side. What's that like? How's Price Labs? Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, so I kind of fell into the industry. I mean, you know this, but for everyone else, when I moved back home after living in Atlanta for a really long time, moved back to the Destin, Niceville area, and sort of just happened to get a 360 Blue job opening alert because there was the word marketing in there. I had been working in marketing and was looking into getting into analytics, business analytics. And I was like, wow, it sounds like the perfect combination of kind of what I'm looking for. Interviewed with you and the rest is history. I switched. So, I worked in revenue management for about 4 years between 360 Blue and RealJoy, and then switched over to the software side in 2022. It's been 3 years, like to the day, tomorrow. So yeah, been at Price Labs for 3 years. And it's funny because we already had this conversation of like, do you want to be on the tech horse or the revenue management horse? And well, with Price Labs, I get the best of both. So that's a little nutshell of how I got here.
I am a huge fan of Price Labs. And so having you here is very, very, very exciting. I also love Wheelhouse to Andrew Kitchell if he's listening, but got to shout out Price Labs. Melanie, you started Key Data. Was it immediately post-college? Is this right?
I did a 1-year position at college in like an analytics focused role at Furman, which was fun. We worked with a lot of different community organizations. So jump right into how do we use data to help people make decisions. And that 1-year position was up and Key Data was looking for some people. And I had a connection with Scott McLeod, our COO. So definitely it's who you know, not always what you know story, which was fun. Not to devalue what I know. And yeah, I jumped into Key Data. It'll be 8 years and a couple months, which is insane because Key Data is 8 years old. So wild to have been there for like this huge kind of growth phase for the company. So yeah, I jumped in on the analytics side of things, built that team for Key Data. The team is still around, does a ton of reporting, and kind of random data requests. So a lot of blog posts on what's happening in the U.S. short-term rental industry. And then I do a lot of kind of big keynote style presentations on state of the industry as well, which is why people mostly know me. That position has evolved in the last 6 months, which has been really fun. I now oversee enterprise level data deliveries So massive data deliveries to a lot of our large partners, both in the vacation rental industry and then outside of the industry, just anybody who wants to know what's going on with short-term rentals. And then actually just a couple of months ago, got another promotion. I now oversee kind of our entire internal data pipeline, which is really fun. So from scraping all the way through what we send to our customers. And so the role has just gotten more and more technical and it's more internal facing than ever. But it's been a ton of fun and a huge challenge. So that's what's going on with me.
You have grown like exponentially with Key Data over the last 8 years. And it's funny because you and I both started working with Jason when I was 22. You had to have been like somewhere around like 22, 23, like pretty young, and took on leadership positions really early. Did you struggle in the beginning with that, with just like finding your footing?
Yeah, I would say to some extent, I still struggle with it. It's the benefit, but also one of the scary things about being at a high growth company is there's so much opportunity. But sometimes, I think you get those opportunities before you really feel ready, which is probably true at any company. So it's been such a journey of developing that self-confidence in my leadership and management skills, especially as a young woman, and finding that voice and finding kind of the rhythm and flow of managing, especially multiple teams at this point, with a lot of kind of older, more experienced people than myself. So yeah, it's been a journey, but it's been so fun, and just feel so grateful to have had all those opportunities. Like when I joined Key Data 8 years ago, it was just kind of, let's go see what happens. And Jason and I talk regularly about nobody could have predicted this. And so it's just, what an amazing journey it's been.
I can't believe that it's been 8 years. That is completely wild to me.
Yeah, I got to grow up with the company, which now that I'm grown up, but it's been wild.
Amber, you worked on my team when I had like literally just become a manager, maybe a year or two prior, and know how much I struggled there and like really, really, really helped me grow in my own management position. What do you think like you've learned about female leadership over the course of the last, how long ago was that? Was that 7 years ago?
7 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Other than the fact that you were like, wow, my boss has no idea what she's doing.
I was like, I hope I get to tell you this because I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I was like explaining to friends in Atlanta, like what I was doing, one of the first things I would say is that I work for a 25-year-old genius. Like literally, that's how I described you because you were a 25-year-old genius. Everything, every sort of foundational knowledge I have in revenue management comes from you. And 360 Blue and Ashley Horsley. I know that's one of the subjects we're going to get onto, like in terms of the women we admire. But what I learned at 360 and had sort of not yet conceptualized how important it was for me to have female leaders, a female boss, a female president, CEO, even better. I didn't really start to realize because I just happened to have female bosses and female leaders. I was lucky in that regard. Even in my previous career in PR and marketing, I mean, that's historically a lot of women in that field, not to discount that. And I think that after I moved on from 360, I realized how much I want to have a female boss, a female leader to look up to. Because I just don't think that the challenges that we face, like men as sensitive as they are and as patient as they can be, or as sensitive as they can be, they really just don't get it, And so, if there's like a challenging customer or something like that, I know that Becca's going to understand what that's like. So.
Mm-hmm. I over the last like couple of years experienced my first like challenge working with men in the workplace. I mean, I guess that's not really true because at 360 there were certainly times where I felt that I wasn't taken seriously, and I think a lot of that was my own insecurity. And working with both of you, actually, you both are not afraid to speak your mind. And like Amber, it obviously, I've told you this before, like it intimidated the hell out of me when I was 25, and like you would tell me like, hey, this thing you did pissed me off, or like I'm frustrated by this, and I was like, I don't know how to have these conversations. Like, does she not like me? Because that was like the thing that I cared most about. And Melanie, you have been in a room with some of the smartest men in the industry since you were in your early 20s, like trying to prove yourself. And I think that I'm like so interested to hear how that journey has been as well. Like, what is it like sitting in a room with the Jasons of the world who have hired very powerful and talented and incredibly smart women over the last couple of years, but he's a loud voice to sit next to because, you know, he's so respected in the industry. And so do you find yourself like having to demand attention, or do people listen to what you say the second that data comes out of your mouth?
I am surprised, but I just teared up thinking about like the experience of working with Jason over the past 8 years. I'm sure he'll go back and watch this and have the same kind of reaction. Yeah. I mean, what a journey. I mean, total hats off to Jason and his confidence and trust in the women in his life, including myself. Like, he has promoted me so many times and never once approached me in a way that made me feel kind of undervalued or underappreciated as a young woman in the space, which is wild. You know, I've had certainly that experience with other people. You know, this is different than Amber's experience. For the most part, I've only had male bosses, which is very different. With, you know, the small stint of time that Ashley Horsley was in a super kind of senior position at Key Data. And so it has taken a lot of effort over the past 8 years to figure out how to feel comfortable and confident in these situations where often I'm the only woman in the room. And that's, you know, that's not just at a conference. That is on a daily basis, working with kind of our data engineers and senior data folks at Key Data, who for the most part have been mostly men. Like, there are a lot of times I'm on the phone with 8 other people and they're all men. And most of them have been wonderful to work with, and they're respectful and kind and approachable. But there's been some interesting personalities to have to deal with too. And so really I've just worked so hard to find like my voice and my confidence in those situations. And even if I'm the only woman and I'm, you know, less technical than a lot of these people, like learning to trust my own experience and kind of trust what I bring to the table. And put it out there in a, you know, hopefully well communicated way after I've paused and say 3 times in a sentence. But just figuring out, where I fit into that room and just really leaning in has worked well for me. You know, back to the kind of men in leadership situation, again, shout out to Jason. Like, when Ashley left Key Data, he came to me and said, like, I know we have a gap in our leadership team and I need you to hold me accountable and like speak up when I'm forgetting to speak for the women in the room too. Which took a lot of guts, I think, to just admit that. Obviously, it's a ton of responsibility for me to feel like I'm speaking for women. You know, in the last few years, though, we've hired a lot of women, promoted a lot of women to leadership positions. And so I am less likely to be the only woman in the room kind of at Key Data's leadership level, which has been an amazing experience. And so wonderful to have those ladies to work with and learn from.
It's so much about finding like your own confidence, which I think can be really hard. Like, especially in your 20s and 30s when you're like trying to figure out who you are as a human being, let alone like how you're perceived by everybody else in the room. And I feel like I've been going through this identity crisis as I prepare to have a baby. And like, think about how that's going to change my life and my career when my identity has been like solely defined by what I do for a living. And I think it's such an important conversation to like instill this confidence in young women really early on, that like, although, maybe you're underqualified for a position, I certainly was when I first started my career. If you are in a room with people who trust and believe in you, like it's very easy to start building that self-confidence. But a lot of the times that's not the case. And I remember I used to think to myself, like, okay, I might look young, and obviously I can't do anything about the fact that I'm a woman, but hopefully when people hear the words that come out of my mouth, they'll then take me seriously. And it's just like so much mental gymnastics that you have to do that men don't. And that's just a fact. Amber, you're obviously a woman in data who has had positions on both the property management side and the vendor side. You've dealt with homeowners, you've dealt with guests, and now you've had clients on the tech side at being at Price Labs, which Price Labs is overall a male-run company. Mm-hmm. How has that been? Like, you report to Becca, who's a female, who's amazing. Mm-hmm. But how, like, has your experience been different as a woman in data on the Price Lab side of things as compared to being on the vacation rental, like the manager side?
I think that there are a variety of, customers that I speak to. And I think that I kind of equate it to like owners when I think about it from the property management side, and how some owners could be great, some a little more difficult. And I can, think to maybe a couple of times, like when you're talking about, only recently, like having like a really like strong challenge with males. And I have memories at 360 Blue, whether it be a difficult owner, and usually it was, of just like talking over you or ignoring you, and how angry that made me to just witness that. So I've had some difficult customer interactions that are similar to kind of that vibe. And in terms of leadership, and I'm sure they're going to listen to this, and we have three leaders, and I love all of them. I have point blank asked Richie, I'm like, have you ever thought of having a female CEO? Because it was like right after the Women's Summit, and like we didn't even have a place on that stage because we don't have a woman in leadership. And I was like, we should have a place on that stage. And I think that it says a lot when you have women in leadership for a tech company. And that's kind of been just the main challenge. It's like there are some challenging customers. There are, situations where we occasionally reassign accounts. With growth, we want to have everyone kind of having an equal number of accounts. And that recently happened. And, it's different taking on an account from a male coworker than a female coworker, I'll just say. I have to tell them that I've been at Price Labs for 3 years. I have to tell them I was a revenue manager for years before that for 2 extremely successful companies that are known throughout the industry. So the challenges more come from customers. I would love to see us have a female in a more prominent leadership role, absolutely. But I do think the challenge kind of comes from more the client side now. Mm-hmm. And I again kind of compare it to, those occasional difficult owners we had sometimes.
I'm going to ask you guys this question, and I'll answer it first from a homeowner perspective. My first memory that I have of recognizing like, oh, things are different for me in my career because I'm a woman. Jason and I went to a homeowner meeting, and I remember it was in watercolor, and it was at one of the beachside condos. So we're like sitting out on the porch with a homeowner who was a woman, and it's the 3 of us. It's like such a beautiful day. We're looking at the beach, And we were talking about revenue. That's why Jason had brought me to the meeting. And the homeowner looked at me and she said, "You look like you're still in high school." And I'll never forget it. And I remember Jason standing up for me and like looking at her and saying like, "Oh, the reason that I brought her to the meeting is because I have absolutely no idea what your revenue looks like. Like it's all going to be Meaghan." And that is like, I think such an example of who Jason is as a leader, like not to like continue to inflate Jason's ego, but, and he's a girl dad and has a badass doctor wife and has been surrounded by powerful women. But I remember, and I'm so glad that I had him there during that experience because I felt so immediately insecure and embarrassed and like didn't understand my place in the conversation. And so for my leader, a man, to say like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, yeah, she looks young and she is actually like, she can't do anything about that. Like she knows what she's talking about and that's why she's in the meeting. And I want to know from both of you, Melanie, if you want to go first, like, do you have a story that is like ingrained in your mind like this?
I don't think I have one specific point in time that I can look back to like that. I had a difficult situation for about a year and a half that with a man professionally that at the beginning I knew he didn't fully listen to me and I knew he didn't fully take me seriously, but I was not willing to let myself say he has a problem with women. Because that's hard to admit to yourself because it means you have no control over the situation, right? Like, I am a woman. I will always be. There's nothing I can do there. And so it was, maybe 6 months of like, if I work hard enough and answer these questions well and prove myself in these conversations, like he will take me seriously. And it got me nowhere. And so I really just had to sit down about a year ago and tell myself, like, I don't want to admit that this is real, that some men really do treat women differently, especially in a technical role. But that's exactly what's happening here. And I don't have any control over the situation. Mm-hmm. That was like the first time that I fully allowed myself to feel like, man, like, again, some men just really don't see women as equals and they don't even know that about themselves, but it's true. And there's nothing I can do about it. And so that mindset shift didn't necessarily change the way I interacted with this guy, but did change the story I told myself because I allowed myself like that release of control ended up being a little helpful to say like, okay, I can stop trying so hard. Like to some extent, it just is what it is. And he's going to take my ideas and they're going to be his and he's not going to, accept it until he's had a thought a week later that supports it. So that is less positive than your experience, Meaghan. But it was wild that after like years in this industry, that was really the first like long-term negative interaction I'd had with somebody. And again, weird to feel that switch flip and acknowledge to myself, like, sometimes there's just nothing I can do about it.
Mm-hmm. I had my first experience of being called emotional by a man in the workplace a couple of years ago. And I like kind of like you, right? Like, I want to prove that I'm not emotional. And every email that I sent, I would be like, take anything that could possibly be perceived as emotion out of this. Like, make it so cut and dry. I mean, I would literally look through every communication I had with this person through like the most critical lens. So I could never be perceived as emotional again. And I think I like listened to a podcast or something. Something happened when I remember thinking like, I mean, it's okay to make some fucking emotional decisions sometimes that are also backed by data. But like, I'm a human being with emotions. And like, I think that like the most incredible leaders make decision backed by data with also like human emotion involved in those decisions. And like, it's the exact same thing that you're talking about, Melanie, where I just kind of thought to myself, like, oh, I like actually like this thing about myself. And I certainly can't do anything about the fact that like you think I'm emotional and like it's because I'm a woman. And it's like you try for so long to like, okay, what can I do? Like, what kind of like, how can I fit into this like hole that you're trying to put me in? And it is so freeing to be like, never mind. I'm just going to like be who I am.
Which is the opposite side. Like what came out of this realization that some people are going to have a problem with me just because I'm a woman became like, well, let me lean into this. Like I am successful for some of the traits that women leaders are well known for having a little bit more of than male leaders. So things like empathy and communication and asking questions, right? Like approaching projects and conversations with curiosity, like being willing to say, hey, I don't know the answer to that. Let me go ask somebody else and I'll get back to you. And like really working hard on relationships and being approachable to the people that work with me and for me. Like that's what's catapulted me as a leader in the last couple of years, is leaning into those positive aspects of being a woman in leadership that I think we don't talk about enough, right? I think a lot of times it's a focus on like the negative experience or these are the challenge, which is true. Like we all experience those. We should talk about them. But I also think there's such an amazing opportunity to lean into some of those characteristics that women have and really focus on how those can further our careers and our companies.
I could not agree more. Amber, like, do you have a story like mine or Melanie's that you can remember or think back on, or just an experience where you've thought like, something might not be right here?
So, you know, kind of going back to this sort of thinking about my early sort of career experience in marketing and PR, where there are a lot of women that work in that industry. And it was when I was in that world that I started to see the double standards, because it was clients were mostly men and we as the agency were mostly women, at least on my team. And it was I've always been an observer. It's one of the reasons I like data, because I'm always observing other people, particularly. And the most impactful moments are when I witness someone else being treated differently. I've mentioned, you know, times I can remember you being talked over in meetings, and just how angry it made me. I can think of, you know, client interactions for this as in the PR days. It's always being talked over. I think that's like a triggering point for me, being interrupted or something like that. And so when I witness that, and I continually, it's like, it's in a meeting and this man is continually doing this, like oblivious to the fact that he keeps either talking over this boss of mine, female boss of mine, or like ignoring what she said, like completely, you know, just kind of, you know, maybe he was just thinking about what he was going to say and so not listening. Regardless, most of my experiences that are so tangible for me are witnessing someone else go through it. And it's often in meetings. And I mean, it's like, even just thinking about it now gets my blood boiling a little bit.
Same.
But yeah, and I don't want to go into the specifics. I can remember that meeting though. There's one particular meeting that I remember because I said something. I was like, oh, I think Meaghan was just talking about that.
It's so funny. I don't even
Let's
remember.
hear from Meaghan.
Which is like,
it made me so angry.
yeah, the homeowners honestly were really bad. Like that is what I remember most. And like going into meetings with homeowners to talk specifically about revenue management or their performance with like a male counterpart, and them like I would watch the eyes of the owner and they would only look at like my male coworker and feeling like so frustrated by those meetings, and then leaving and turning to my coworker and being like, did you notice that? And they were like completely oblivious to it, which I found to be like so interesting. And yeah, those, it was like not as overt as being called emotional, but definitely not like benign in any way. And, you know, my first experience, I think, of just this like constant battle to be taken seriously, which is like such an exhausting task to do when, you know, and Melanie, you said, once I realized like there's nothing I can do about the fact that I'm a woman, then like it's really freeing.
There is one other thing I was going to ask. This is a more common comment, I guess, now as I'll be at conferences and I'll meet like a customer in person. And a comment I get a lot is, oh, you're so much smaller than I thought you were. And I'm like, would you say that to a man? I know. We're all petite women, right? Do you all get that comment? When you meet someone in person, I get it quite a bit. Like, oh, you're so much smaller. I'm like, I'm sorry. What does that have to do with anything? And why are you saying it to me? Why are you comfortable enough to even say that to me?
So bizarre.
I'm 5'8", so I'm tall enough that I don't usually.
Wow. I get wow, you're dressed up today. That's that's like mainly what that used to happen to me at 360 Blue a lot. Like, oh, someone dressed up for work today. And I remember it was Ashley actually heard someone say that to me and was like, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Like, do you go into a man's office and say like, look who dressed up for work today? No?
Yeah.
The industry seems to have gotten slightly more dressy in the last 5 years at conferences, which is interesting, just as it's gotten a little more professionalized, right? There's a little more money in the space than there used to be. But especially my first couple of years trying to go to conferences, I never knew what to wear. Because at that point, I mean, still a ton of people wear jeans. But I'm like, if I'm going to be on stage, I'm a young woman. I have to compensate for this somehow and at least look really professional in like slacks and I'm buttoned down. And so I've definitely gotten that, wow, you're dressed up. I also, for a long time, was afraid to ask any of my male counterparts, like, what should I wear to this meeting or this conference? And now I've just gotten a little more comfy saying like, what do I wear for this? And so it's interesting. That's definitely a place that, Meaghan, to your point, I have been more careful in the way I dress and present myself, almost as a way to like compensate for being a young woman. Definitely more careful than some colleagues and some peers in the space, which is really interesting to notice.
Mm-hmm. I went to one IMN, or I've been to two IMNs maybe. One of them I went to, I was wearing a bright pink dress with strawberries all over it and sneakers. And I was sitting in one of the rooms, like kind of in the back listening. And it was like a big ballroom. And I didn't notice for a while. And then I started looking around and I was like, every single person here is in either like suits, blue, black, or gray. And I mean, my dress was highlighter pink with like strawberries just covering it. And I remember thinking like, I'm just like going to own this. And yeah, like those comments, no one like said anything to me, but I remember looking around and being like, oh, I feel like I'm definitely sticking out in this room. But yeah, I agree. I feel like in conferences now, like people are starting to get more and more dressed up and high pressure, especially when you're in maternity clothes these days. Okay. So I do want to talk data. First, I want to ask you both, is there a female leader? And Amber, you spoke a little bit about this, about Ashley, that you have had or maybe not had, or a female on the data space, on the tech side of things, or just like a female in business that you have looked up to or that you admire? Amber, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so it's interesting that this podcast is with the three of us, because like Melanie, you don't know this, but when I was, at 360 had just gotten into the space, I do remember Ashley Gorsley like specifically mentioning like, hey, if you want to learn more about analytics, you should talk to Melanie at Key Data. And so it's just so interesting that like both of like this podcast is with both of you, and both of you, along with Ashley Horsley, I feel like really started my foundation in revenue management and data analytics. I will also say that the women on RevProf, there's a few of them. I'm afraid I'll leave someone out if I name specific, but the women, sort of heading up RevProf, and of course the women behind DARM and the Women's Summit. Thank you for everything you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Melanie, what about you?
Yeah. I mean, so many people to shout out here. There are a couple partner success people at Key Data who have taught me a lot about revenue management. I think it's one of my strengths, if I can shout myself out for a second. So I understand what people are using data for, which allows me to talk about it better, to say, like, here's the data point and insight and why you should care about this and what you can do with it. So Jennifer Talbert is one of those women who, like, I've learned so much from over the years. Like you, Amber, I'm afraid to leave people out. Key Data also, maybe 6 months ago, started a Women in Key Data group. We meet once a month. We talk just kind of about some of the challenges about being a woman, particularly like how we manage all of these things and all the different expectations. Sally Henry is somebody I have to shout out. She manages our European operations and is on stage all the time, talking data to a ton of different people. I've learned a lot from her. And so that group at Key Data has just been so wonderful to say, like, okay, we're all in this together. We work at a very, welcoming and collaborative and diverse company, but we still have a different experience than our male coworkers. So it's been so amazing to have that space as well. So yeah, I would say one thing in general I struggled with kind of starting out in this is not having one woman to look up to of like, wow, I want to be just like her. But learning over the years to take like bits and pieces from different people and say, like, I really admire the way you do that. Like, I'm going to work it into the way I live my life or operate, and then looking at somebody else and bringing something for them to just really figure out like how I want to operate and live has been just a really fun way to approach it.
Mm-hmm. Female like friendships in the workplace are so important. And I think like we kind of started that back at 360. We used to do something similar where we would meet like once a month and we would talk about like, topic, like what's the hardest thing you've had to deal with this month, and work related or personal related. And like you could just kind of come and bring your backpack and unload it. And now my friends and I, we do a weekly girls' night in Jackson. And it took me like a long time to make friends here. Small community. And it is like those times of the week where I feel like Thursdays, I'm like a new person because I have Wednesday nights. And so I love that Key Data is doing that. That is incredible. Okay. So I really want to talk about, I feel like over the last couple of months, with the new administration, there has been a lot of, maybe when I say a lot of fear, I'm solely talking about myself. I'm certainly afraid of what like travel and spend and the economy is going to look like in the next couple of months or the next 4 years or the next 8 years. It's funny because I keep texting Jason, do you think we should be concerned? Do you think we should be concerned yet? Like my text with him, it's like just me being like, and what's your concern level now? Do you have any? And so I'm really curious, like, there are a lot of people who are super excited about the new administration and what it could mean for the economy. I want to stay focused on like travel data and what you guys are seeing. We are impacted at InHaven by tariffs, and that has been, scary over the last couple of months just because it's been very unknown, and there are tariffs and then there aren't and then there are, and you kind of wake up and you don't know what you're going to wake up to every single day. And so I really want to know, like, what are you seeing, Amber? Like when you're talking with customers, do you have customers that are anxious, that are seeing noticeable like downturns in their occupancy or ADR or RevPAR? Just in general, like what are you seeing on the customer side?
So I have to be careful because I have a lot of customers in the Panhandle of Florida, And as we all know, there are a lot of supporters in the Panhandle of Florida. So not had a lot of customers verbalize those specific concerns. That being said, on a personal note, so I'll just talk about personal note. My husband and I are going on vacation next month, and we're hitting up a few national parks. And, there's been a lot of news about national parks. So I'm just going to keep my comments to talk about that. How it affected us is that we've been talking about this vacation for a while, but didn't really start planning it until a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. We put off booking for a couple of weeks. And then we're like, there's nothing solid we can see about staffing concerns or shortages really affecting the experience based on what we're seeing on like Reddit and things like that. So we're just going to send it. We're just going to go ahead and book. So I actually asked my team to just pull some scrape data on, I got an article from like the Smithsonian magazine talking about last year was a huge year for national parks. And so this article's like got the most visited and least visited of the national parks. So I was like, hey, can you just look at the top 5 and just kind of pull some data, some year-over-year data? And there's no significant effects on kind of the quote major KPIs of like occupancy, ADR, RevPAR. Booking windows are shorter though. And that was kind of my gut instinct that typically when we're in a time of uncertainty, people wait to book later. And so that's kind of, even though it hasn't specifically been verbalized in customer conversations, what has been verbalized is like these very tiny shrinking booking windows. I'm talking people booking a huge vacation rental home in, Destin, Florida for thousands and thousands of dollars the day before they check in. And I'm like, well, that was unheard of, a few years ago. So I'll just say that, and then I'm just being a little more careful about what I say.
I do wonder, I'm next to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, and we've got a lot of friends that work for the National Park Service, some of which no longer work for the National Park Service because they don't have jobs anymore. And, a lot of people are worried about what the impacts are going to be this summer. But it's interesting because as people who live in the community who rely solely on tourism, a lot of people are afraid there are going to be too many travelers and not enough employees at the national parks to keep them well maintained, or that will receive a significant amount of complaints about trails not being maintained or not enough National Park Service workers there to answer any questions, which are valid concerns that likely will come to fruition this summer. And so it's such this catch-22 because, I want to say every single one of my friends, we rely on, myself included, work in the vacation rental industry, still rely on tourism. My husband owns a catering company that solely relies on weddings over the summer and the farmers market during the summertime, and has a restaurant that needs to do well in the summer. And so you're you want people to be here, but then you're also worried, what does this look like? And are our guests going to be super frustrated? And are we going to have a lot of angry people in town because of the lack of staffing that we have at the national parks, which are why people come here in the first place. So I can resonate with those comments. Melanie, I know that Key Data has released some data already, and you posted a couple weeks ago that was very interesting. A lot of information on Canadian travelers and the impact that that's had, particularly on Florida, I believe it was. But I'm curious to see what are you seeing overall? Could you summarize that a little bit? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest direct impact we've seen is Canadians are boycotting U.S. travel, right? To the extent of it's down 25% on a year-over-year basis for a lot of our markets. And that's pretty significant, especially in a lot of these beach markets. We'll see how long that continues, but especially snowbird travel kind of next fall and winter is so important that if those travelers still don't come back, a lot of our kind of Southeast coastal markets are going to be in a not great spot. Overall, we have not seen the bottom fall out yet. I think with tariffs, especially, it's been a lot of a will they, won't they situation. It seems like to some extent, everybody's holding their breath to see what happens in the next couple of months. And I think to some extent, we just won't know until policies go into place and have been in place for a few weeks. We do see luxury holding up a little bit better than budget. So kind of larger year-over-year declines on the lower rate end of the spectrum, and stronger on the kind of high-end property end of the spectrum. And so, some signs there that people who are more worried about their family's financial situations and budgets are holding back more from travel. That aligns with what the airlines are talking about, with what, stores and retail are talking about, is that high kind of earner into the consumer is doing okay. And it's the lower budget people who are not. And so I think we'll just continue to see that play out.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's primarily going to impact markets with those lower ADRs, and then the Aspens of the world are going to be okay?
Yeah, I think so. And even kind of within somewhere like Myrtle Beach that is a little more affordable, they may see their higher end travelers continue to come, and those lower end kind of last minute bookers just choose to not travel this year.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious for both of you. I know we're kind of nearing the end, but when, you're communicating with customers or you're thinking about 2025 as a whole, whether it has to do with just economic uncertainty, Amber, what are you telling people to really look out for and keep a pulse on?
Yeah, so I would say that what I really kind of try to caution people about is not slashing prices. If we're seeing these booking windows shrink, there is still a chance, right, to get a better ADR. That being said, I'm guilty of it myself. I'll freak out. And if something's not booking, I'm going to keep dropping that price as long as the owner's not going to, feel bad about it. But I think that, not enough people are looking at booking window, and booking window is really important to keep in mind, because there are a lot of things that you can learn from booking window. If people, for whatever reason, if they're waiting to book really, really late, you probably need to revisit your last minute pricing approach, or your potentially, get rid of that last minute pricing approach, have it all occupancy based. Things like that I am trying to focus on. Now, summer is looking good for this area. A lot of the customers, again, are kind of right around this panhandle area, and summer's looking really healthy for us. But, who knows what's going to happen? People could still cancel. You don't really know for sure, but for right now, summer's looking really good. And I'm just trying to get people to still, I'm still in kind of spring break mode too. We're at the tail end of spring break. Spring break has been weird this year. There is no high week of spring break this year. They're
not
all
even Atlanta?
No. So Atlanta has it's split up between weeks. So Atlanta public schools are the first week of April. And I guess some were still that last week of March. But it just if you look at the trend lines, it's flat. Every single week has gotten around, at least again, the customers I'm looking at, I've been looking at big picture data lately. I've been, just having a lot of one-on-one customer calls, and we're just seeing a lot of just kind of almost every single week has similar occupancy. ADR, not so much, but yeah, just really interesting, just different than what we've seen in the past.
Spring break has changed so significantly over the past 5 years. Melanie, what are you cautioning people to look at and be mindful of on the key data side?
Yeah, I'm with Amber on pricing. I think some people are still a little too optimistic on what rate they can actually get booked. And like Amber said, are slashing their prices at the last minute. And so we continue to encourage people start adjusting those prices a little bit a few months in advance. and then make small incremental adjustments. But we've got to get away from training our consumers, our travelers, to like book at the last minute to get that rock bottom price. Like that is so anxiety inducing when I look at the data, and like this massive amount of reservations are booked under 14 days from arrival. Like, do people just live their lives in panic for the entire year, hoping that things show up? Like, just adjust your prices a little bit earlier and try to capitalize on that further out kind of demand and booking window. It's not quite that easy, but let's at least try and see what happens.
Okay. Last two questions. These are rapid fire. Melanie, if you guys can tell me, what's your favorite conference?
Darm. I love the data and revenue management conference. I just get to nerd out. It's so focused. It's so like full of data, which is what I love. So it's my favorite one of the year.
I do love Darm. Amber, what about you?
I mean, I'll say Women's Summit, but yeah, basically Darm/Women's Summit when they have Women's Summit. Yeah, for the same sort of reason, Darm, because it's all data revenue management focused, right? So that's our specialty, right? That's what I want to hear about. That's all I want to really hear about and learn about. And the Women's Summit, it's just like best vibes. Just good feel vibes all around. So.
The Women's Summit this year is like 3 weeks before I give birth. And I'm not kidding you. I have like mapped it out on every which way, trying to figure out how I could make it to Charleston and like be okay. And I'm going to have to ask my OB, but it's probably not going to happen. So I'm pretty upset about that. And then Darm is like a couple months after. And I told Ashley, I'm like, I think I'll be able to make it to Darm. And she's like, you're like still going to be on maternity leave. And I'm like, I just love it so much. Like I can't imagine missing it, but I probably will miss both this year, which is upsetting. Okay. Melanie, if you weren't working in data, last question, what would you be doing?
I would probably be working for the federal government in land management, which is a good time to not be doing that. My degree is in sustainability science. So like, how do we save the world while also improving quality of life? And I do a lot of mapping and data stuff. So something like the Bureau of Land Management would be really fun.
I think that is incredible. When I first moved to Jackson, people would say BLM all the time. And I thought everyone was talking about Black Lives Matter, which I was like, this is great, like amazing. And then I realized it was the Bureau of Land Management. And there are in fact 2 BLMs. I love that answer. Amber, what about you?
So I've had a few different like sliding door moments. If that's an old movie, it's like from the 90s, but where it's like, wow, I could have gone this direction. And that would be to be like a professor in college. If I had pursued grad school and not like freaked out my senior year and was like decided I was too burnt out to continue in school, I would have probably gotten my PhD in psychology and would be teaching, ideally. Yeah.
You'd be such a good college professor. Mm-hmm. I cannot explain how grateful I am to both of you for doing this, for sitting down with me today. I think this conversation was both timely and incredibly important. And I thank you so much for your vulnerability and your willingness to be open and honest. And I think that there are so many women that listen to the podcast that I know will love this. So thank you both so much. I respect and admire you. And I'm so grateful to both of you.
Thank
okay.
you.
See you soon.